The blood on her hands had long since dried to a rust-brown crust, but Karga could still feel its weight as she stumbled through the forest. Her armor stripped away, her weapons confiscated, her honor shattered like pottery beneath a warhammer. She had served the Ironjaw clan for 12 years, rising through the ranks until she commanded 200 warriors, until her name was spoken with respect around campfires, until she dared to believe she had finally earned her place in a world that saw her kind as nothing more than monsters to be slain. Then came the accusation, the trial that lasted mere minutes, and the sentence delivered by Warchief Gruumsh himself with all the warmth of winter steel. Exile, disgrace, and the loss of everything she had fought so hard to build. Now she wore only the simple tunic and trousers they had allowed her to keep, her feet wrapped in cloth bindings that were already falling apart, and she had not eaten in 3 days. The forest gave way to rolling hills dotted with patches of farmland, and Karga knew she should avoid settlements, should keep to the wilderness where at least the animals did not scream at the sight of her green skin and tusks, but hunger gnawed at her belly with teeth sharper than any wolf. The sun hung low in the western sky, painting everything in shades of amber and gold, and that was when the scent reached her on the evening breeze. Bread. Fresh bread, the kind that filled a home with warmth and comfort, the kind she remembered from her childhood before the clan wars, before her parents died and left her to forge her own path through blood and battle. Her stomach clenched so hard it hurt, and before her rational mind could argue against it, her feet were already carrying her toward the source of that intoxicating aroma. The farmhouse sat at the edge of a wheat field, modest but well-maintained, with smoke curling from its chimney like a beckoning finger. A barn stood nearby, and she could hear chickens clucking in their coop, could see a vegetable garden thriving in neat rows behind a low fence. Everything about the place spoke of careful tending, of someone who took pride in their work, and Karga felt a sharp pang of longing for something she could not name. She approached slowly, her warrior instincts still intact despite her current state, watching for dogs or hired guards or any sign that her presence would be met with violence. But the yard remained quiet except for the chickens and the whisper of wind through the wheat. She made it to the door before her courage faltered. What was she doing? No human would willingly give an orc anything but a blade through the ribs. She should turn around, should go back to the forest and figure out how to trap rabbits or find edible roots, should accept that this life was now behind her. But the smell of that bread was so strong it made her head swim, and she found her fist rising to knock before she could stop herself. The door opened to reveal a man perhaps 5 years older than her own 24 summers, with dark brown hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes the color of sun-warmed honey. He wore a simple linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms dusted with flour, and for a moment he simply stared at her with an expression she could not read. Not fear, not anger, but something closer to surprise mixed with what might have been concern. "Please," Karga heard herself say, hating how her voice cracked with desperation. "I am hungry. I will work for food. I can chop wood, repair fences, anything you need. I just need something to eat." The man's gaze traveled over her slowly, taking in her ragged state, the bruises on her arms from where the guards had not been gentle during her expulsion, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "You are far from any orc settlements," he said finally, and his voice was deeper than she expected, with a gentle quality that seemed at odds with the caution in his stance. "I have no settlement anymore," she replied, too tired to lie. "I was exiled. I have been walking for many days. I do not ask for charity, only the chance to earn a meal." He was silent for a long moment, and she prepared herself for rejection, for the door to close in her face, for curses or threats or worse. Instead, he stepped back and gestured for her to enter. "Come inside. I just pulled the bread from the oven. You can eat first and we will discuss work after." Karga stood frozen, certain she had misheard. "You would invite me into your home," you asked politely. "You offered to work and you look like you are about to fall over," he said with a slight shrug. "My name is Roland Garrett. This is my farm, and if you are going to collapse from hunger, I would prefer it not be on my doorstep where I will have to drag you somewhere." Despite everything, she felt a small, startled laugh escape her. "I am Karga. No clan name anymore, just Karga. And I promise not to collapse if I can help it." He smiled at that, and it transformed his face entirely, erasing the caution and revealing something warm underneath. "Then come in, just Karga. The bread will get cold." The interior of the farmhouse was clean and organized, with a large hearth dominating one wall and a sturdy wooden table in the center of the main room. Shelves lined the walls, holding jars of preserved vegetables, dried herbs hanging in bundles, tools kept in careful order. It was the home of someone who lived alone, but had not let that solitude turn to slovenliness. Roland moved to the table where 3 loaves of bread sat cooling on a wire rack, their crusts golden brown and crackling faintly in the warm air. He cut thick slices from one loaf, slathered them with butter that melted instantly into the steaming interior, and set the plate in front of a chair. "Sit," he said simply. "There is water in the pitcher, or I can make tea if you prefer." Karga sank into the chair as though her strings had been cut, her eyes fixed on the bread with an intensity that might have been embarrassing under other circumstances. "Water is fine, thank you." He poured her a cup and set it beside the plate, then stepped back to lean against the counter, giving her space. She forced herself to pick up the first slice slowly, with dignity, but the moment the bread touched her tongue, all pretense of restraint vanished. It was perfect, still warm from the oven, with a crispy crust and a soft, airy interior that seemed to melt in her mouth. She devoured the first slice in seconds, then the second, washing them down with gulps of cool water that soothed her parched throat. Roland said nothing, just watched her with that same unreadable expression, and when she finally slowed down enough to look up at him, she saw no disgust or mockery in his face. "How long since you ate?" he asked quietly. "3 days. Maybe 4, I lost track." She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, suddenly aware of how she must look, how she must smell after days of travel without proper rest or washing. "I apologize for my appearance. I am not usually so uncivilized. You are a person who was hungry and is now less hungry. There is nothing uncivilized about that." He pushed away from the counter and moved to the hearth, where a pot of something that smelled savory and rich hung over the low flames. "I have stew as well, if you want something more substantial. And there is a washroom in the back if you would like to clean up." The kindness was almost harder to bear than cruelty would have been. Karga felt her throat tighten, felt the prickle of tears she absolutely would not shed. "Why are you helping me? You do not know me." "For all you know, I could be dangerous." Roland ladled stew into a wooden bowl and brought it to the table, setting it before her along with a spoon. "Are you dangerous? I was a warrior, a commander. I know how to kill in more ways than most people know how to live." She met his eyes directly, refusing to soften the truth. "But I am not a murderer, and I do not harm those who show me kindness. I swear that on whatever honor I have left." He studied her for a moment, then nodded as though satisfied. "Then eat your stew. We can talk about the work I need done after you have rested a bit." The stew was as good as the bread, thick with vegetables and chunks of meat in a rich broth that warmed her from the inside out. She ate more slowly this time, savoring each bite, and gradually became aware of Roland moving around the kitchen, cleaning up flour and putting away supplies with the easy efficiency of long practice. He did not hover over her or pepper her with questions, did not demand explanations or payment beyond what she had already offered. He simply let her eat in peace, and that simple act of respect touched something deep in her chest that had felt frozen since her exile. "How long have you lived here alone?" she asked between bites, curiosity getting the better of her. "5 years. I inherited the farm from my uncle who had no children of his own. Before that, I was a soldier." He glanced at her, one eyebrow raised slightly. "So I also know how to kill in more ways than most people know how to live, though I prefer not to think about those days much." "A soldier," she repeated, understanding clicking into place. "That is why you do not flinch at the sight of me. You have seen orcs before." "I fought in the border skirmishes up north, saw a lot of death on both sides, a lot of pain that served no purpose I could ever determine." His voice had gone quieter, edged with old grief. "Eventually, I decided I was done helping kings and warlords settle their disputes with other people's blood. I came here, learned to grow things instead of burning them, and I have been much happier for it." Karga finished her stew and set the bowl down gently, afraid to break the strange, fragile peace of this moment. "I think I understand that feeling. I spent 12 years fighting for my clan, climbing ranks, proving myself over and over again. And in the end, it took only one accusation to strip it all away. Someone claimed I let human prisoners escape instead of executing them. It was a lie, but the war chief did not care about the truth. He cared about making an example. "Did you let them escape?" Roland asked, and there was no judgment in the question, only genuine curiosity. She was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "No, but I thought about it. They were farmers, not soldiers." Old men and young boys pressed into service by a lord who did not care if they lived or died. Killing them would have been legal by the laws of war, but it would not have been right. I executed them as ordered, and I have regretted it every day since." The words tasted like ash in her mouth, the weight of that old shame pressing down on her shoulders. Maybe the war chief saw that regret in my eyes. Maybe that was crime enough. Roland was silent for a while, his gaze distant, and she wondered if she had said too much, had revealed herself as the kind of weak, soft-hearted fool who had no place in a warrior culture. But when he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "I think regret means you still have a conscience. That is worth more than most people realize." The tears she had been fighting threatened to spill over, and she blinked them back fiercely. "I should go to the washroom before I fall asleep in your stew bowl, if the offer still stands." "It stands. Through that door, second on the right." "I will get you some clean clothes as well. They will be too big, but better than what you have on." She followed his directions and found a small washroom with a basin, a pitcher of water, and a precious bar of soap that smelled faintly of lavender. She stripped off her ruined clothes and washed methodically, scrubbing away days of dirt and sweat and dried blood from cuts she had not noticed getting. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a stranger. Gaunt cheeks, dark circles under her amber eyes, her black hair matted and tangled. She looked like exactly what she was, a person who had lost everything and was barely holding herself together. By the time she emerged, Roland had laid out a clean shirt and a pair of trousers on a chair near the fire, along with thick wool socks. The clothes were indeed too large, but she rolled up the sleeves and pant legs and cinched the waist with a length of rope, and it was the cleanest she had felt in what seemed like years. Roland had lit a few lamps against the gathering darkness outside, and the farmhouse glowed with warm, golden light that made everything feel safe and distant from the harsh world beyond its walls. "Better?" he asked, looking up from where he sat at the table with a ledger and a quill. "Much better." "Thank you." She hesitated, then moved to sit across from him, feeling awkward now that the immediate desperation of hunger had been satisfied. "You mentioned work. What do you need done?" He tapped the quill against the ledger thoughtfully. "Harvest is coming in another month, and there is more work than one person can manage. I need help repairing the north fence before the deer get into the wheat, clearing out the irrigation ditches, mucking out the barn, and about 100 other tasks I have been putting off. I can offer food and a place to sleep in the barn, and if you stay through harvest, I can pay you in coin as well. You would trust me to stay here, to work your land without supervision. I would trust you to try, and if you prove untrustworthy, I will ask you to leave. But I do not think that will be necessary." He smiled again, that warm, transformative expression. "Besides, you gave me your word you would not harm those who show you kindness. I am choosing to believe you." Something in her chest, something that had felt hard and cold and dead since her exile, began to thaw. "Then I accept your offer, Roland Garrett. I will work hard for you. You will not regret this kindness." "I do not think I will," he said, and his voice held a quiet certainty that made her want to believe him. That night she slept in the barn on a bed of clean straw with a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and for the first time since her world had shattered, she felt something that might have been hope. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both strange and deeply comforting. Karga woke with the sun, washed at the pump in the yard, and presented herself at the farmhouse door for breakfast. Roland always had something ready: oatmeal with honey and berries, eggs and toast, or sometimes leftover stew from the night before. They ate together at the big wooden table, and at first the silence was awkward, both of them uncertain how to navigate this unusual arrangement. But gradually conversation began to flow more easily. Small exchanges about the weather or the chickens or the best way to repair a split fence post. The work was hard but satisfying in a way combat had never been. Karga's warrior training had given her strength and endurance, and she threw herself into every task with the same intensity she had once brought to the battlefield. She repaired the north fence, digging new post holes and stretching wire with steady hands. She cleared the irrigation ditches, hauling out accumulated silt and debris until the water flowed freely again. She mucked out the barn, repaired a loose board in the chicken coop, and helped Roland harvest the vegetable garden as summer reached its peak. Roland was a patient teacher, showing her the rhythms of farm life with the same care he clearly brought to everything he did. He taught her how to milk the cow, though her large hands made it awkward at first, and she cursed in Orcish when the animal kicked over the bucket. He showed her how to collect eggs without startling the hens, how to recognize when the tomatoes were perfectly ripe, how to cut wheat at just the right angle. And slowly, day by day, Karga felt herself becoming something other than a warrior. Not less, but different. Someone who built instead of destroyed, who nurtured instead of conquered. The physical changes came first. The gauntness faded from her face as regular meals filled out her frame. Her muscles, which had begun to waste from hunger and hardship, regained their definition. Her hair, properly washed and combed, fell in glossy black waves past her shoulders. She caught Roland watching her sometimes as she worked, his expression thoughtful, and she wondered what he saw when he looked at her. The emotional changes were slower, subtler, but no less profound. The constant tension that had defined her life in the clan, the need to always prove herself, always be stronger, always watch her back, began to ease. Here there were no challenges to her authority, no rivals scheming for her position, no war chief ready to condemn her on a whim. There was only the work, the land, and Roland's steady, quiet presence, They fell into patterns of conversation over shared meals. She told him about growing up in the clan, about her parents who had died in a raid when she was young, about clawing her way up through the ranks with nothing but determination and skill. He told her about his time as a soldier, about the things he had seen and done that still haunted his dreams, about choosing this quieter life and never regretting it. They talked about philosophy and ethics, about whether honor meant following orders or following your conscience, about the arbitrary nature of borders and the similarities between peoples who claimed to be enemies. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the wheat fields, Roland asked the question she had been waiting for. "Do you miss it? The warrior life?" Karga was quiet for a long time, watching the sky turn from gold to rose to deep purple. "I miss the certainty of it," she said finally. "I miss knowing my place, my purpose. I miss the respect I had earned, the sense that my life had meaning. But I do not miss the violence. I do not miss the killing. I do not miss looking into the eyes of someone I am about to end and seeing my own fear reflected back at me." She glanced at him, her tusks catching the last light. "Does that make me weak?" "No," Roland said firmly. "It makes you human, or orc. You know what I mean." He smiled slightly, then sobered. "I think it takes more strength to walk away from violence than to embrace it. The world does not see it that way, but the world is often wrong about what matters." "Is that why you never married?" she asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Because you walked away from the life people expected you to live," he laughed, but there was something sad in the sound. "Partially. Also because I have not met anyone who wanted to share this life with me. Most women from the village see a farm as a burden, not an opportunity. They want excitement, adventure, the kind of life you find in cities and courts. I just want to grow things and watch the seasons turn and maybe have someone to share breakfast with who actually talks back." "The chickens do not count?" Karga asked, and was rewarded with a genuine laugh. "The chickens have opinions, but they are very limited in scope. You, on the other hand, have interesting opinions on everything from crop rotation to whether the gods care about mortal affairs." "I said the gods probably have better things to do than micromanage our lives." "That is hardly controversial. You also said that if the gods do exist and they do micromanage our lives, they are doing a terrible job of it and should perhaps delegate more." I found that extremely funny coming from a former military commander. She could not help grinning at that. Delegation is important. The war chief never learned that lesson, which is part of why his campaigns always fell apart at critical moments. They sat in comfortable silence after that, and Karga felt something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. It took her a while to identify the feeling as happiness, simple and uncomplicated, the kind she had not experienced since she was very young. She was happy here, she realized with some surprise. Happy doing simple work, eating simple food, having simple conversations with a man who treated her like a person instead of a monster or a weapon. When had her life become so uncomplicated? When had that become enough? The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt like coming home. As summer deepened and the wheat turned from green to gold, preparations for harvest began in earnest. Roland hired 2 workers from the village to help with the cutting and threshing, warning Karga that her presence might cause problems. She offered to stay out of sight, but he shook his head firmly. "This is as much your harvest as mine. You work the land, you have a right to share in bringing it home. If the men have a problem with that, they can work elsewhere." The 2 hired hands, both young men in their early 20s, arrived at dawn on the first day of harvest with scythes over their shoulders and nervous expressions on their faces. They froze when they saw Karga standing beside Roland, their hands tightening on their tools in a way that was not quite threatening but definitely wary. "This is Karga," Roland said calmly. "She has been working the farm with me all summer. She is part of the crew, and I expect you to treat her with the same respect you would show any other worker. Are we clear?" The taller of the two men, who introduced himself as Thomas, nodded slowly. "Clear, sir. We will have no trouble." The shorter one, named William, was less convinced but followed his friend's lead. "No trouble," he echoed, though his eyes kept darting to Karga's tusks. The first day was tense, with Thomas and William giving her a wide berth and speaking in low voices when they thought she could not hear. But Karga had spent years earning the respect of soldiers who had every reason to doubt her, and she knew the best response was simply to work harder than anyone else. She took the heaviest loads, worked the longest hours without complaint, and by the end of the first day both men were regarding her with something closer to cautious respect than fear. By the third day, Thomas actually asked her advice on the best way to stack the cut wheat to avoid moisture damage, and she answered seriously, drawing on knowledge she had learned from Roland. By the end of the first week, William was sharing his lunch with her, and they discussed the merits of different farming techniques with the kind of casual ease that came from shared labor. Roland watched these interactions with quiet satisfaction, and more than once Karga caught him smiling to himself as he worked. She wanted to ask what amused him, but somehow she already knew. He was pleased to see his faith in people being justified, pleased to see strangers overcoming prejudice through simple proximity and shared purpose. It was a small thing, perhaps, but in a world that seemed determined to divide people into us and them, into human and orc, into friend and enemy, it felt like a victory. The harvest took 3 weeks of hard, sun-soaked labor. They worked from dawn until dusk, taking breaks only for water and quick meals eaten in the shade of the barn. Karga's muscles ached in new ways, her hands developed fresh calluses, and she had never felt more alive. There was something primal and deeply satisfying about bringing in the fruits of the land, about seeing the results of months of careful tending transformed into grain that would feed families through the winter. This was creation in its purest form, and for someone whose life had been defined by destruction, it felt like redemption. On the last day of harvest, after the final sheaf had been cut and stored in the barn, Roland produced a bottle of wine he had been saving and declared a celebration. The 4 of them sat on the porch as the sun set, passing the bottle around and laughing about the mishaps and small triumphs of the past weeks. Thomas told a story about the time he had accidentally let a pig loose in the village church. William countered with an even more ridiculous tale about his sister's disastrous attempt at making cheese. And even Karga found herself sharing the story of her first day as a military recruit, when she had mistaken a superior officer for a stable hand and told him to move because he was blocking the latrine. "What did he do?" Roland asked, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "Made me clean every latrine in the camp for a month," Karga said ruefully. "But he also said I had spirit, and when I finished my punishment he personally recommended me for officer training. Sometimes I think the worst moments teach us the most." "A wise perspective," Roland said, his voice warm with something she could not quite identify. Their eyes met and held for a moment longer than necessary, and Karga felt her breath catch in her throat. Thomas and William left as full darkness fell, calling out their goodbyes and promising to return if Roland needed help with any future projects. When their voices had faded into the distance, Karga and Roland remained on the porch, the bottle of wine nearly empty between them, the night air cool and sweet with the scent of cut grass. "Thank you," Karga said quietly, "for giving me this chance, for treating me like a person." for not giving up on the idea that people can be better than their worst impulses. Roland turned to look at her, and in the lamplight spilling from the windows, his face was open and honest in a way that made her heart beat faster. "I should be thanking you. You saved my harvest. You brought life back to this place. You made me remember that I chose this life not just for the peace, but for the possibility of sharing it with someone who understands." He paused, then added more softly, "You made me less lonely, and I did not even realize how lonely I had been." The air between them felt charged with something electric and terrifying, and Karga found herself standing, found herself taking a step closer to where Roland sat. "I have been many things in my life: warrior, commander, exile, but I have never been someone's companion, someone's friend. I do not know how to do this." She gestured between them, helpless to name what this even was. Roland stood as well, and suddenly they were very close, close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his honey-colored eyes, could count the faint freckles across his nose, could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "Neither do I," he admitted, "but I would like to figure it out. If you want to stay, not as a hired hand or a worker, but as a partner, someone who shares this life with me, someone I can share breakfast with who talks back." "The chickens will be devastated," Karga said, and her voice came out breathless and uncertain. "The chickens will have to learn to cope." His hand rose slowly, telegraphing his intention, giving her every chance to pull away. When she did not, his fingers brushed her cheek with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "May I?" She understood what he was asking, and the fact that he asked at all, that he gave her the choice, made her want to say yes more than she had ever wanted anything. "You may." He kissed her softly, carefully, as though she were something precious that might break. His lips were warm and slightly chapped from days of sun and wind, and they tasted faintly of wine and possibility. Karga had kissed people before, quick, fierce couplings that meant nothing beyond the momentary release of tension, but this was different. This was tender and questioning, an exploration rather than a conquest, and when Roland pulled back slightly, she found herself leaning forward to chase his mouth with her own. The second kiss was deeper, more certain, and Karga felt something inside her that had been locked away for years finally break free. She wrapped her arms around Roland's waist, felt his hands slide into her hair, and for a long moment the world narrowed to just the two of them. Two people who had walked away from violence and found something better in each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Roland rested his forehead against hers and laughed softly. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks. I was afraid you would think I was taking advantage, that you would feel obligated because I helped you. I would have broken your arm if you tried anything I did not want," Karga said bluntly, then softened her tone. "But I wanted this. I have wanted this. I just did not think someone like you could want someone like me. Someone like me, a failed soldier turned farmer who talks to his chickens. Someone kind, someone good, someone who sees people instead of monsters." She cupped his face in her large hands, careful of her strength. "You made me believe I could be more than what my clan told me I was. You made me believe I deserved kindness." "That is a dangerous thing to give someone, Roland Garrett." "Why dangerous?" he asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. "Because now I will not want to leave. Because now I will want to stay here with you and build a life that has nothing to do with war or violence or proving myself worthy. Because now I will want things I never let myself want before." She swallowed hard, forcing out the words that terrified her. "I think I am falling in love with you, and I do not know what to do with that." Roland's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face with joy. "I think I am falling in love with you too, and I think we figure it out together, one day at a time, one meal at a time, one harvest at a time. He kissed her again, quick and sweet. Stay with me, Karga, not as my worker or my guest, but as my partner. Share this life with me. Help me build something that matters. Yes, she said, and the word felt like an oath, like a promise more binding than any she had sworn to the Ironjaw clan. Yes, I will stay. I will be your partner. I will build this life with you. They stood there on the porch holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead, two people who had been broken by violence and remade by gentleness, and Karga felt the last of her old life fall away like a discarded skin. She was no longer a warrior without a clan, no longer an exile without a home. She was simply Karga, partner to Roland, farmer and builder of a life that had nothing to do with rank or honor or the approval of those who had cast her out. She was simply herself, and for the first time in her life, that was enough. The weeks after harvest should have been easier, a time to rest and enjoy the fruits of their labor, but instead a different kind of tension settled over the farm. Word had spread through the village about the orc woman living on Roland Garrett's land, and opinions were divided. Some, like Thomas and William, saw no harm in it. Others were less accepting. It started with small things. Roland went to the village to sell grain and returned with a split lip and skinned knuckles. He claimed he had walked into a door, but Karga knew a fight when she saw its aftermath. 2 days later, someone threw a rock through the farmhouse window in the middle of the night, shattering glass across the kitchen floor. The rock had a note tied to it with crude letters that read, "Monster Lover." "We should report this to the village elder," Karga said as they cleaned up the glass, her hands shaking with suppressed rage. "And say what? That someone does not like my choice of company. They will tell me I brought this on myself." Roland's voice was bitter in a way she had never heard before. "They will say I should send you away, that I am causing trouble by harboring an orc." "Then maybe I should go," Karga said quietly, though the words felt like swallowing broken glass. "I do not want to bring danger to you. I do not want you to suffer because of me." Roland whirled on her, his honey-colored eyes blazing. "Do not even think it. This is your home now. You have as much right to be here as anyone. If the village has a problem with that, it is their problem, not ours. It becomes our problem when they start throwing rocks. Next time it might be torches." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "I have lived with prejudice my whole life. I know how this goes. It will escalate until someone gets hurt, and I would rather leave now than watch you bleed for me." "Too late for that," Roland said, touching his split lip ruefully. "And I am not letting you go. We will figure this out, together." But figuring it out proved harder than either of them anticipated. The harassment continued sporadically over the next few weeks. Someone let the chickens out of their coop one night, and it took hours to round them all up. Another time they found the irrigation ditches filled with debris, undoing weeks of Karga's hard work. Most troubling was the morning they woke to find a crude effigy hanging from the old oak tree near the road. A straw figure dressed in rags with green paint smeared on its face, and wooden tusks tied to its mouth. Roland cut it down with shaking hands, his face white with rage, and Karga held him as he stood there breathing hard, fighting for control. "I fought for this kingdom," he said through gritted teeth. "I bled for these people, and this is how they repay me, by threatening someone I care about. By trying to drive away the person who makes me happy. Welcome to my world," Karga said, trying for humor though her heart was not in it. "Where your service means nothing if you are born the wrong color." The breaking point came on a cold autumn morning when Roland went to the village to buy winter supplies. Karga had offered to come with him, but he insisted she stay at the farm, claiming he would move faster alone. She agreed reluctantly, spending the morning mucking out the barn and trying not to worry. When he had not returned by early afternoon, worry became fear. By late afternoon, fear became certainty that something was wrong. She found him on the road halfway between the village and the farm, walking slowly with one arm wrapped around his ribs and blood streaming from a cut above his eye. His supplies were scattered in the dirt behind him, and when he saw her, his face crumpled with a mixture of relief and shame. "They were waiting for me," he said as she rushed to support him. "5 of them. Said I had one last chance to send the orc away or they would do it for me. I told them to go to hell, and they decided to send me there first." Rage unlike anything she had felt since her exile roared through Karga's veins. She wanted to run to the village, wanted to find those 5 men and show them exactly what an orc warrior was capable of. Wanted to paint the village square with their blood and dare anyone to challenge her. But Roland's hand on her arm stopped her, his voice weak but insistent. "No, do not give them what they want. Do not prove them right about you." "They hurt you," she said, and her voice came out low and dangerous, the voice of the commander she used to be. "They hurt you because of me. I should do something. What you should do is help me home and tend these wounds. Then we will figure out what comes next." He leaned heavily on her, and she could feel him trembling with pain and exhaustion. "Please, Karga, do not let them turn you back into a weapon. That is not who you are anymore." She wanted to argue, wanted to rail against the unfairness of it all, but he was right. She was not a weapon anymore. She was a person trying to build a life, and violence would only destroy what they were creating together. So she swallowed her rage, wrapped her arm around Roland's waist, and helped him back to the farmhouse in silence. She tended his wounds with shaking hands, cleaning the cut above his eye and wrapping his ribs where they were bruised but thankfully not broken. He bore it all stoically, only wincing when she tied the bandages too tight, and when she was finished he caught her hand and held it against his chest. "I am not giving up on us," he said firmly. "I am not letting them win, but we need help. We cannot fight this alone. Who would help us? Who in this entire region would stand up for an orc and the man foolish enough to love her?" Roland smiled despite his injuries. "You said you loved me. Was that the first time?" "I said I was falling in love with you. This is different. This is already fallen. This is already all the way gone." She brought his hand to her lips, kissing his scraped knuckles gently. "I love you, Roland Garrett. I love you so much it terrifies me, and I will not let them hurt you again." "Then trust me," he said. "I have an idea." 2 days later, when Roland was well enough to sit a horse without falling off, they rode together to a small monastery nestled in the foothills north of the farm. The monks who lived there were famous throughout the region for their scholarship, their healing skills, and their philosophy of universal compassion that transcended race and species. If anyone would listen to their story without prejudice, Roland said, it would be Brother Marcus, the monastery's elder and a man he had known since childhood. They were greeted at the gates by a young monk with a shaved head and ink-stained fingers who looked at Karga with surprise but no fear. He led them to a sunny courtyard where Brother Marcus sat reading a leather-bound book, his white beard nearly to his waist, his face creased with wrinkles that spoke of a life spent smiling. "Roland Garrett," the old monk said warmly, standing with the aid of a carved walking stick. "It has been too long, and you have brought a friend. Welcome, child. I am Brother Marcus. Please sit and tell me what brings you here." They sat on stone benches in the autumn sunshine, and Roland told their story from beginning to end. He spoke of finding Karga starving on his doorstep, of the summer they had spent working together, of the love that had grown between them despite all the reasons it should not have. He spoke of the harassment they faced, of the violence, of the impossible choice between his home and his heart. Through it all, Brother Marcus listened without interruption. his pale blue eyes moving between Roland and Karga with keen intelligence. When Roland finished, the old monk was quiet for a long time, his gnarled hands folded over the top of his walking stick. Finally, he turned to Karga and asked gently, "What do you want, child? If you could have anything in the world, what would you choose?" No one had ever asked her that before. Her wants had never mattered, only her duty, her service, her obedience. But now, sitting in this peaceful courtyard with Roland's hand warm in hers, she knew the answer immediately. "I want a home," she said simply. "A place where I belong, where I do not have to prove myself every day or fear that everything will be taken away on someone's whim. I want to wake up next to the man I love and know we are safe. I want to grow things and raise things and build a life that matters. That is all. Is that too much to ask?" "Not at all," Brother Marcus said with infinite kindness. "It is the most human thing in the world, wanting a home. And that is the heart of it, is it not? You are not different from us in any way that matters. You want safety, love, purpose. The same things any person wants. The same things the people in that village want, though they are too blinded by fear and prejudice to see it. So what do we do?" Roland asked. "How do we make them see?" Brother Marcus smiled, and there was something sly in the expression. "We show them. We hold a gathering here at the monastery, invite people from the village and the surrounding farms. We let them meet Karga, hear her story, see that she is a person worthy of respect and compassion. We appeal to their better nature." "And if they do not have a better nature?" Karga asked skeptically. "Then we appeal to their pragmatism. You worked Roland's harvest and helped bring in more grain than he could have managed alone. You have skills and strength that could benefit the entire community. We frame it not as charity or bleeding heart compassion, but as simple practicality." The old monk's eyes twinkled. Sometimes people's better nature needs to be accessed through their self-interest. There is no shame in that. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning with Brother Marcus and several of the other monks. Invitations would be sent to every household in the region, framing the gathering as a harvest celebration and community feast. Karga would be introduced as a valued member of the community who deserved to be welcomed properly. There would be food and music and opportunities for people to interact with her in a non-threatening environment. It was, Brother Marcus admitted, a gamble, but it was a better option than continuing to live under siege. The gathering was held on a crisp day in mid-autumn, when the leaves were at their most brilliant, and the air smelled of wood smoke and possibility. The monastery's great hall had been decorated with branches of crimson and gold, long tables laden with food contributed by dozens of families, and a space cleared for dancing. Musicians tuned their instruments in one corner, and monks circulated with cups of hot cider and warm smiles. Karga stood at the edge of the hall feeling like she was about to walk into battle, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wore one of Roland's shirts tucked into borrowed trousers, her hair braided back in a style she remembered her mother wearing, trying to look as non-threatening as possible without erasing who she was. Roland stood beside her, his hand warm on the small of her back, and she drew strength from his presence. "You do not have to do this," he murmured. "We can leave right now. We can go somewhere else, start over." "No," she said firmly. "I am tired of running. I am tired of letting other people's fear dictate my life. If this does not work, we will deal with it. But at least we will have tried." People began to arrive in twos and threes, families and elderly couples and young people dressed in their finest clothes. Some looked around with open curiosity, others with suspicion. Thomas and William arrived together and immediately came over to greet Karga with genuine warmth, which helped settle some of her nerves. Brother Marcus moved through the crowd with the ease of long practice, greeting everyone by name, making introductions, steering conversations away from conflict and toward common ground. The moment of truth came when the village elder, a stern-faced woman named Constance, arrived with a small delegation including the mayor and several prominent farmers. She surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes, her gaze landing on Karga with all the warmth of a January frost. "So," she said loudly, cutting through the ambient noise of conversation, "this is the orc that has caused so much trouble." The hall fell silent, everyone turning to watch the confrontation. Karga felt Roland tense beside her, but she gently moved his hand away and stepped forward to meet Constance's gaze directly. "My name is Karga," she said clearly, pitching her voice to carry without shouting. "I was exiled from my clan for the crime of showing mercy. I came to this region starving and alone, and Roland Garrett took me in when he had every reason to turn me away. I have worked his farm through the summer and harvest, and I have proven myself to be a trustworthy and capable worker. I am not here to cause trouble. I am here to build a life the same as anyone." She paused, then added more quietly, "I know I look different. I know my kind has been your enemy, but I am just a person trying to find a place to belong. That is all." Constance studied her for a long moment, and Karga could see the calculations happening behind those sharp eyes. Finally, the older woman nodded slowly. "Thomas and William speak well of you. They say you worked harder than any 3 men and never complained or caused problems." "That counts for something." "It counts for a lot," Thomas called out from across the hall, emboldened by the cider or perhaps by righteousness. "She is good people. Anyone who says different is either lying or ignorant." Several others murmured agreement, and Karga felt a small spark of hope. But then a man she did not recognize pushed forward, his face red with anger or drink or both. "Good people. She is a monster. Her kind killed my brother in the border wars. How are we supposed to just forget that?" "I am sorry for your loss," Karga said, and she meant it. "I fought in those same wars. I killed people whose families probably still grieve them. I cannot undo that. All I can do is choose not to kill anymore, not to be defined by violence. Is that not what we all want? An end to the cycle." "Pretty words," the man spat. "But words do not bring back the dead." "No," Roland said, stepping up beside Karga. "Nothing brings back the dead. I learned that as a soldier. All we can do is choose what world we build for the living. And I choose to build a world where people are judged by their actions, not their ancestry. Where kindness is stronger than hatred. Where someone like Karga can find a home." He looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of people he had known his whole life. "I love her. I am going to share my life with her. You can accept that and keep me as your neighbor and friend, or you can reject it and lose both of us. But either way, I am not changing my mind." The silence that followed was deafening. Karga held her breath, waiting for the rejection she was certain would come. But then Brother Marcus spoke up, his voice gentle but carrying immense weight. "I have known Roland since he was a boy. I have never known him to make a decision lightly or to give his heart without good reason. If he says this woman is worthy of love and respect, I believe him. More than that, I have spoken with her myself, and I find her to be thoughtful, honest, and deeply compassionate. She is welcome in this monastery anytime, and I would hope she is welcome in this community as well." Constance exchanged glances with the mayor, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, she sighed heavily. "The world is changing whether we like it or not. The old wars are over and new ways are coming. Perhaps it is time we adapted." She turned to Karga, her expression still stern but softening slightly. "You have proven yourself to those who worked with you. I suppose that will have to be enough. You may stay, but know that you will be watched. Any trouble, any hint of threat, and the arrangement ends. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear," Karga said, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Thank you. I will not give you reason to regret this." The tension in the hall broke like a snapped bowstring, and gradually conversation resumed. Not everyone was happy with the outcome. The man who had lost his brother left in a fury, and several others followed him. But most people stayed, and as the evening progressed and the cider flowed, Karga found herself in dozens of small conversations. A farmer's wife asked her advice on dealing with foxes in the henhouse. An elderly man wanted to know about orc metalworking techniques. A young girl stared at her tusks with open fascination until her mother pulled her away, though not before the girl called out, "I think you are pretty." By the end of the night, Karga was exhausted but lighter than she had felt in months. She and Roland walked home under a canopy of stars, their fingers interlaced, not quite believing what had happened. "You were magnificent," Roland said as they crested the hill that overlooked his farm, their farm. "The way you spoke to them, the way you held your ground, I have never been prouder of anyone." "I was terrified," she admitted. "I thought they would reject us. I thought we would have to leave." "Would you have left with me in a heartbeat? Anywhere you go, I go. We are in this together." She stopped walking and turned to face him fully, the farmhouse glowing with lamplight below them, a beacon of home. "I love you, Roland. I will spend every day of my life earning this chance you have given me." "You do not have to earn anything," he said, cupping her face in his hands. "You just have to be here. Be yourself. Be my partner." He kissed her softly, and this kiss held the promise of all the kisses to come. All the mornings waking up together, all the harvests and winters and springs stretching out before them. "Marry me," he said when they broke apart. "Not now, not tomorrow, but soon. Marry me and make this official. Make it permanent." "Yes," Karga said, and laughed because the word felt so absurdly simple for such a huge question. "Yes, absolutely yes, 1,000 times yes." They stood there on the hill holding each other as the stars wheeled overhead. Two people who had been stripped of everything and had somehow found it all in each other. Below them, the farm waited, and beyond that, a community that had taken the first tentative steps toward accepting someone different. It was not perfect, Karga knew. There would be more challenges, more prejudice to overcome, more battles fought with words instead of swords. But for the first time since her exile, she believed it was possible. She believed in the future they would build together. Winter came early that year, blanketing the farm in snow that turned everything quiet and clean. Karga and Roland spent those cold months working on expanding the farmhouse, adding a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen, making space for the life they were building. They worked side by side, and she learned carpentry from him while teaching him some of the metalworking techniques from her childhood. They made a good team, she thought, each bringing different skills to the table, each complementing the other's strengths. Thomas and William visited regularly, often bringing their families, and gradually other people from the village began to stop by as well. Some came with genuine friendliness, others with barely concealed curiosity, but all of them left having seen that Karga was simply a person living her life, no more threatening than anyone else. She helped a neighboring farmer repair his broken plow, taught a group of children how to track deer in the snow, and shared her mother's recipe for a healing poultice with the village healer. Small acts, perhaps, but they built bridges more effectively than any grand gesture could have. The wedding took place in early spring, as the snow was melting and the first green shoots were pushing through the earth. It was held at the monastery, with Brother Marcus officiating and dozens of people in attendance. Karga wore a dress that one of the village women had helped her make, simple green linen that matched her skin, with embroidery at the collar done in thread the color of wheat. Roland wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair neatly combed, his face glowing with happiness. They stood before Brother Marcus in the monastery's garden, surrounded by blooming flowers and the people who had become their community, and spoke vows that had been written specifically for them. Roland promised to be her home, her shelter, her partner in all things. Karga promised to be his strength, his companion, his love through whatever challenges came. And when Brother Marcus declared them married, the cheer that went up from the assembled crowd was genuine and loud and full of joy. At the celebration afterward, Constance approached Karga with a small wrapped package. "This belonged to my mother," the elder woman said gruffly. "It is a tradition to give newlyweds something from the old generation to carry into the new. I thought you should have it." Inside the package was a beautiful quilt, hand-stitched in a pattern of interlocking stars. Karga ran her fingers over the careful stitching, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Thank you," she managed. "I will treasure it always. See that you do. And see that you continue to be worthy of the trust this community has placed in you." But Constance's stern words were undercut by the slight smile tugging at her mouth. "Welcome to the village, Karga Garrett. Properly this time, Karga Garrett." She turned the name over in her mind, testing how it felt. She had been Karga of the Ironjaw clan, then just Karga the Exile, and now she was Karga Garrett, wife of Roland, farmer, member of this community. It felt right in a way nothing else ever had, like a key finding its lock, like coming home after a long journey. The years that followed were not perfect, but they were good. The farm prospered under their joint management, and they expanded gradually, buying more land, hiring seasonal workers, building a reputation for quality grain and fair dealing. Karga continued to face occasional prejudice, but it was balanced by the growing number of people who knew her as a person rather than as an orc. She became known for her skill at repairing tools, her knowledge of animal tracking, her willingness to help neighbors in need. Children who had been taught to fear, orcs grew up playing in her fields and begging her to tell stories about her warrior days. The man who had lost his brother in the border wars never forgave her, and sometimes she saw hatred in his eyes when they passed in the village square. But even he stopped actively causing trouble after his barn burned down one winter, and Karga was the first to arrive with buckets and strong arms to help save his livestock. He never thanked her, but he never threatened her again either, and sometimes that was all you could ask for. Roland proved to be everything she had hoped for in a partner and more. He was patient when she struggled with the domestic skills she had never learned, encouraging when she doubted herself, passionate when they came together in the darkness of their bedroom. He made her laugh with his dry humor, challenged her with his different perspective on the world, and held her when the nightmares came, when she relived battles she wished she could forget. In return, she taught him to fight properly, to defend their home if the need ever arose. She shared her culture's traditions, the songs and stories she remembered from childhood, the foods her mother had made. They blended their lives together until it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. 5 years after their wedding, on a warm summer evening, Karga stood on the porch watching the sun set over their fields and felt a flutter of movement in her belly. She placed a hand over the small swell there, barely visible beneath her loose dress, and allowed herself to smile. She had not been sure it was even possible, a child between orc and human, but the village healer had confirmed it that morning with barely concealed amazement. A baby, due at the end of autumn, a new life that would bridge 2 worlds. She heard Roland's footsteps behind her and turned to find him carrying 2 cups of tea. "You look thoughtful," he said, handing her one of the cups. Good thoughtful or worried thoughtful? Happy thoughtful, she said, taking his free hand and placing it on her belly. I have news. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by joy so pure and intense it made her breath catch. A baby. We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby, she confirmed, and laughed as he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests that he would hurt himself. This is the best news I have ever received, he said when he finally set her down, his eyes suspiciously bright. Our child. Part of you and part of me. A living symbol of everything we have built here. A child who will face challenges neither of us can fully prepare them for, Karga said more soberly. A child who will be called half-breed and worse. A child who will have to find their own way in a world that does not have a clear place for them. A child who will be loved absolutely and raised to be strong and kind and brave, just like their mother, Roland countered. He knelt down and pressed his forehead to her belly in a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. We will protect them. We will teach them. And we will make sure they know they are wanted and valued, no matter what anyone else says. Karga ran her fingers through his hair, overcome with love for this man who had given her everything she had never dared to want. We will, she agreed. And maybe by the time they are grown, the world will be a little kinder than it was to us. If it is not, we will teach them to be part of making it so, Roland said, standing and pulling her close. The same way you did. One bridge at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one person at a time. They stood there wrapped in each other's arms as darkness fell, and the first stars appeared, and Karga felt the story of her life finally make sense. She had been stripped of her rank, left with nothing, wandering without purpose until the smell of baking bread had drawn her to this farmhouse and this man. She had lost everything and gained everything. She had been a warrior and had become a builder. She had been alone and had found a family. The baby was born on a cold night in late October, arriving with a lusty cry that echoed through the farmhouse. The village healer attended the birth along with 2 midwives, and their expressions when they first saw the child were a mixture of awe and uncertainty. The baby had Roland's honey-colored eyes and Karga's pointed ears, skin a shade between green and tan that was entirely unique, and the tiniest nubs of tusks just visible in their gums. A girl, perfect and healthy and howling with indignation at being thrust into the cold world. Karga held her daughter for the first time and felt her heart expand beyond what she had thought possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world. We are so happy you are here." Roland sat beside the bed with his arm around Karga's shoulders, staring at their daughter with wonder written across his face. "She is beautiful. She is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. What should we name her?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never settled on one, wanting to wait until they met their child to see what fit. Now, looking at the tiny perfect person in her arms, Karga knew immediately. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope, because that is what she is. Hope for the future, hope that things can be better, hope that love is stronger than hatred." "Hope Garrett," Roland said, testing the name. "I love it, I love her, I love you." He kissed Karga softly, then bent to press a gentle kiss to Hope's forehead. "Welcome to our family, Hope. We promise to do our very best by you." Word of the baby spread through the village quickly, and reactions were mixed. Some people celebrated the birth, bringing gifts and well wishes. Others muttered darkly about unnatural unions and refused to acknowledge the child at all. But most people fell somewhere in the middle, curious and uncertain, but willing to withhold judgment until they saw what kind of person Hope grew up to be. Brother Marcus visited a week after the birth, bringing a handmade cradle carved with protective symbols and blessings from a dozen different traditions. He blessed Hope with water from the monastery's sacred spring and declared her a child of the divine, loved and protected by forces beyond mortal understanding. It was a powerful statement from a man whose opinion carried weight throughout the region, and it helped quiet some of the more vocal critics. Thomas and William showed up together with their wives, bringing enough food to feed an army and enough baby clothes to dress a dozen infants. "We figured you would be too busy to cook," Thomas said with a grin, "and babies grow fast, so you will need all of this eventually." Also, William's wife insisted on knitting matching hats for the whole family, his wife Sarah added with a laugh. "So now you all have hats, whether you want them or not." It was exactly the kind of normal, mundane kindness that made Karga's throat tight with emotion. These people saw Hope not as an aberration, but as a baby, as a member of their community who deserved welcome and support. It was more than she had dared to hope for. The first year of Hope's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious milestones. She was a happy baby, quick to smile, fascinated by everything around her. She had her father's gentle temperament and what appeared to be her mother's strength, given how easily she could grip fingers in her tiny fists. As she grew, it became clear that she would be a bridge between worlds in appearance as well as heritage, and Karga found herself fiercely grateful for that. Let her daughter be a reminder that people were people, that love transcended the artificial divisions of race and species. Hope's first word was Papa, which delighted Roland to no end and made Karga laugh at his smug expression. Her second word was Mama, which evened the score. Her third word, inexplicably, was chicken, which sent both parents into fits of laughter and became a family joke for years afterward. By the time Hope took her first steps, wobbling across the kitchen floor into Karga's waiting arms, the family was an established part of the community. Roland's farm continued to thrive, and Karga had become known as the person to consult for difficult repairs or animal problems. People greeted them by name in the village square, included them in celebrations and gatherings, and generally treated them like any other family. It was not universal acceptance, but it was more than enough. One evening, when Hope was 2 years old and finally asleep after an epic battle over bedtime, Karga and Roland sat together on the porch in the gathering darkness. It had become their ritual, this quiet time after the chaos of the day, a chance to reconnect and simply be together. "Do you ever regret it?" Karga asked softly. "Choosing this life, choosing me? All the complications I brought with me." Roland took her hand, threading their fingers together with the ease of long practice. "Not for a single moment. My life before you was fine, but it was hollow. I was just going through the motions, waiting for something to give it meaning. You gave me that meaning. You and Hope. You made me part of something bigger than myself. I used to think my life had meaning because I served my clan, because I was good at fighting, because I had rank and respect. But that was all illusion. This is real meaning. This matters." She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, soap and wood smoke and earth. "Thank you for taking a chance on a starving orc woman with nothing to offer but desperation and a willingness to work. Thank you for knocking on my door instead of just stealing the bread and running," Roland said with a soft laugh. "Although I probably would have chased you down and we would have ended up here anyway, I like to think some things are meant to be. Destiny. You believe in that?" "I believe in choices. I believe we made the right ones, and that made all the difference." He turned his head to kiss her temple. "I believe we built something worth having, and I believe we will keep building it one day at a time for the rest of our lives." They sat there in comfortable silence as the stars emerged one by one, and Karga felt at peace. She had been stripped of her rank and left with nothing. She had wandered lost and alone until the smell of bread baking drew her to this place, to this man, to this life. And now she had everything that mattered: love, home, family, purpose. She had found her place in the world, not through conquest or achievement or proving herself worthy, but through simple human connection and the courage to accept kindness when it was offered. Inside the house, Hope made a small sound in her sleep, and both parents turned their heads instinctively, listening for signs of waking. When silence returned, they relaxed again, and Roland chuckled. "We are going to be doing that until she is 18, Aaron, not we." Listening for every sound, worrying about every little thing. "Probably longer than that," Karga said with a smile. "I suspect being a parent does not have an end date. Then I guess we are in this for the long haul. You, me, Hope, and whatever other adventures come our way." He squeezed her hand. "I am ready for it, for all of it, as long as you are beside me." "Always," Karga promised and meant it with every fiber of her being. "For all of it. For every sunrise and every harvest and every challenge, for the rest of our lives." They stayed there on the porch until the moon rose high overhead. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ashes of their former lives. They had faced prejudice and violence and uncertainty, and they had come through it together, stronger for the trials. And now they had a daughter who would grow up knowing she was loved and valued, who would be taught to build bridges instead of walls, who would carry forward the lesson that people were people no matter what they looked like. It was not a perfect ending, because life was not about perfect endings. It was about continuing stories, about choices made every day to be kind, to be brave, to love fiercely in the face of a world that often demanded hatred. It was about finding home in unexpected places and building family from strangers who became everything. Karga had been a warrior once. Now she was a wife, a mother, a farmer, a builder of a better future. She had been stripped of everything and had somehow ended up with more than she had ever dreamed possible. And as she sat there with Roland's hand in hers and their daughter sleeping safe inside the home they had built together, she knew that she would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here. The smell of bread baking had led her to this doorstep. Love had led her through it. And love would carry her forward into whatever came next, one day at a time, one moment at a time, building a life that mattered from the simple raw materials of kindness and courage and hope. Hope. She smiled at the thought of her daughter's name, at the weight of meaning they had layered onto such a simple word. Hope was what she had lacked when she stumbled out of the forest, starving and alone. Hope was what Roland had given her when he invited her inside and fed her bread still warm from the oven. Hope was what they had built together through trust and patience, and refusing to let the world's cruelty make them cruel in return. And hope was what they had created in the form of a tiny person who would grow up knowing a better world was possible, because her very existence proved it. The night deepened around them, and eventually they rose from the porch and went inside, locking the door against the darkness, secure in the warmth and light they had created within these walls. Tomorrow there would be work to do, fields to tend, meals to cook, a child to raise. But tonight there was only this: two people who had chosen each other and a love that had transformed both their lives. Karga checked on Hope one last time before heading to bed, standing in the doorway of the small room they had added just for her. The baby slept peacefully under the quilt Constance had given them, her mixed features relaxed and innocent, one small hand curled near her face. She looked like the future, Karga thought, like possibility made flesh, like proof that the old hatreds did not have to define the new generation. "Sleep well, little one," she whispered. "Dream of a world where you are not strange or wrong or caught between. Dream of a world where you are simply yourself, and that is enough." Roland appeared beside her, wrapping an arm around her waist and pulling her close. Together they watched their daughter sleep, and Karga felt the weight of gratitude settle over her like a warm blanket. She had been given a second chance at life, at happiness, at becoming someone other than a weapon. She had been given a home and a family and a purpose that had nothing to do with violence or proving her worth through combat. She had been given everything that mattered, and she would spend the rest of her days honoring that gift by building a life worth living. They retreated to their own room finally, closing the door softly behind them. Roland pulled her into his arms and kissed her with the easy familiarity of years together, and she returned the kiss with all the love in her heart. They undressed slowly, taking comfort in the simple intimacy of shared space and shared lives, and when they finally lay down together, Roland curled around her back, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. "I love you," he murmured into her hair. "Every day I wake up grateful that you walked into my life. Every day I thank whatever forces brought you to my door." "I love you too," Karga replied, lacing her fingers through his. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me a reason to keep going when I had nothing left. You gave me everything." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "I was just existing before you came. You made me live again. You gave me purpose and joy and a future I actually wanted to see. We are a team, Karga. Always have been, always will be." She turned in his arms so she could see his face in the dim light filtering through the curtains. "Always," she agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss. They fell asleep tangled together, two hearts beating in sync, two lives joined so completely that the separation between them had ceased to matter. Outside, the farm slept under stars, and the world turned on its axis, carrying them forward into whatever tomorrow would bring. But inside that farmhouse, in that bed, wrapped in each other's arms, Karga and Roland had found their forever. They had found home, and that, in the end, was everything.